Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Vibe podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Dr. Robert Price. We're continuing our third season of Price Week, and on this night we're talking about why First Timothy is not written by Paul the Apostle, and it's just yet another forgery in Paul's name. Again, these discussions are based on his book, The Amazing Colossal Apostle. The link to purchase the book, along with many other books that Bob has written and published over the years, will be in the description below and the pinned comment, including the link to his Substack page. And with that being said, Bob, thank you for joining me tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always great fun. I always say that, but it's always true. So, First Timothy. The first scholar we know of to question the Pauline authenticity of this letter was Friedrich Schleiermacher, and in the, I guess, about the mid 19th century. And he thought that Second Timothy and Titus were actually written by Paul. And one thing that gave him a bum steer there was he compared it to the way Paul is presented and the way he speaks in the book of Acts, which the completely fictitious or fictional, whatever nature of which was not yet apparent to him. And of course, the correspondences he saw there, I think, are better explained on the thesis that the pastorals, Luke and Acts, were all by the same person, perhaps Polycarp. So it's no wonder you'd find some resonances there. But he thought that First Timothy was written by a subsequent author, lifting material from Second Timothy and Titus. But you could tell it was a separate author because he didn't quite get the author of First Timothy didn't quite understand the meaning of some of the phraseology he picked out. For instance, this notion of how only heretics occupy themselves with myths and endless genealogies. I believe Schleiermacher said that in the case of the endless genealogies, that this was more likely, given the rest of the letter, as a reference to like Valentinian Gnosticism, the chains of emanation from the ultimate Godhead. Whereas in First Timothy, the writer doesn't get that and assumes it has something to do with the Old Testament, which has all these very tedious genealogies in it. Though you could throw in a third option, in that the so-called desposunoi, the holy family of Jesus's survivors, they went around. I sort of think this is from Julius Africanus, I'm not sure, but that they went around producing genealogies that showed that they were related to Jesus and therefore were like the royal family and you ought to listen to them. Well, that's possible too. But Schleiermacher figured that this really doesn't sound like the same author, plus the fact that there's so much overlap in the ecclesiology and the setup of church authority structures and all that, that he said, why was, like, it seems like at least one of them is redundant. What's the point of that? Just repeating so much stuff. Well, that's not impossible to imagine if the same writer was actually writing to two assistants, Timothy and Titus, and naturally he would have similar things to tell them. But his idea was that someone had just combined the two of them, which does kind of make sense to me. That otherwise, what is the point? But you're almost getting into synoptic relations and the like there. But he thought that, surprisingly, in retrospect, that First Timothy was based on Second Timothy and Titus, which of course were not denominated that in the text, right? Of course, that's just what later editors dubbed them. But he thought that Second Timothy and Titus were actually by Paul, but all of that was just beginning. It would be later when people would dig deeper and find other discrepancies and so on. I'm looking at Second Thessalonians here. What's the matter with me? Here's First Timothy. Um, oh yeah, and so now this couldn't be a avowedly group epistle here, since it only mentions Paul, and it's written to Timothy, who appears as a co-writer or something in the other ones. And it plunges right into heresy and all of that. One reason, a kind of a biggie that Bultmann and others pointed out, is that the idea of faith is different from in the principal epistles, that in Galatians and Romans and so on, faith is this sort of, to be anachronistic, this Kierkegaardian act of daring faith in God, with Abraham being the classic example. I mean, look at the guy's situation. He's nearly 100 years old, and his wife is an old crone too. And God says, "Hey, don't worry, I'm going to make sure you have a son." And he says, "You are?" And well, I guess all things are possible with God. Okay, I'm counting on it. Wow. And in Romans, I believe, the writer says that's like the kind of faith we have to exercise about a guy who rose from the dead. I mean, if God, that's in effect what happened with Isaac, that he was born, really, I hate to say it, from a tomb rather than a womb. And it's impossible according to human options and resources, but so is the resurrection. And if we dare to believe that, that's what God is looking for. And that opens the gates of the grace of God. But what is it in First Timothy, Titus, and Second Timothy, and the Epistle of Jude? Faith is the faith, the Christian religion, the Christian doctrine, that you made a shipwreck of your faith. You have forfeited your faith and so forth. Like in First Timothy 1, 3 and 4, as I urged you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies, which promote speculations rather than the stewardship from God that is by faith. The aim of our charge is love and issues from a pure heart. Certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law, without understanding either what they're saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. Now, that's interesting. If you say, I guess Schleiermacher, it's been years since I translated that open letter on First Timothy. But it's like, what do the genealogies and myths have to do with the faith that saves, and with the law? So that's where Schleiermacher, I think, picked up the idea that the genealogies must be the ones in the Torah, and somehow people are making a big deal out of that, when it's just a distraction. I mean, it's just antiquarian navel gazing. You don't really need that. That's not going to save you. You need faith. But if you couple it with myths, it sounds like he's referring to Gnostic speculations, but doesn't realize it. I think there's genealogies in the Torah. I guess that's what they mean. So that would be a good example of that. And then he gets into the law. And this sounds very different than the kind of discussion in Romans in verse 8. Now, we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, and those who strike their fathers and mothers, murderers, sexually immoral, men who practiced homosexuality, highly dubious translation there, but whatever, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine in accordance with the gospel of the glory of the blessed God with which I have been entrusted. Isn't that odd? It's like a totally conventional, non-theological characterization of the law. Oh yeah, it's an attempt to keep the wicked in line. The law is for them, at least so they have some idea that what they're doing is wrong, and maybe they would repent. But that's not the idea in Romans, for instance, which at least has a better claim to being actually Pauline. There, it's trying to show the supposed righteous that they're not so righteous. That it comes up against this inner authority in your body, or the longings of your flesh. You got to beat those down, but the law's not going to help you do it. You need the grace of God in Christ. It just doesn't sound like the same sort of writer as in the principal epistles. But let's see, there's the vocabulary, not only of faith, but of various things. That seems to be rather like Luke and Acts, but not like the earlier Pauline or Paulinist epistles. Likewise, the church structure. You don't hear about stipendiary orders of deacons and bishops and widows and all that. You do in Acts, but then again, that's also late. There's an order of widows, but you don't have that stuff in like in First Corinthians, when that describes an average worship service in Corinth, that if you don't hold yourself back and put on the brakes a little, an outsider's going to walk in there and think he's come into the Corinthians insane asylum. Wait a minute. Could anybody go into a nice staid Episcopal Catholic church and say, you people are crazy? No, he's talking about a whole different thing, like the Cane Ridge revival, which is just what I expect Gentile Christianity must have looked like. But not here. Here you've got the bishops, and here are the requirements for them, and all that stuff. So that's a biggie. Also, it's difficult. Now, this almost is moot now, but on the earlier assumption, the traditional assumption that you can construct the career of Paul from the book of Acts and use that to fit in when the letters were all written by him. I mean, that's all kind of erased off the blackboard now. But earlier critics said, you can't fit the pastoral epistles in with any of that. I mean, what's going on here? And this led conservatives to say, well, the only thing I can think is that Paul, expecting to be tried before Caesar and probably get martyred and wing his way to heaven, instead he must have been freed. And then he went on to Spain and all that stuff, and that these letters were written in that later time. But that is nothing but speculation. There's no real evidence in this for that. Yet one other thing, the idea that Paul says, now soon I'll arrive and I'll have plenty to tell you about these things. Well, then why the heck is he writing this letter? I mean, note cards for when he gets there. No, of course, this is what somebody did instead of that imagined trip to the churches. So it just seems to not to be the same author, not to have the same theology, and to reflect a much more advanced degree of church structure, which is another reason I think Philippians is not authentic, because it's got bishops and deacons too. You see that in Acts, but you don't see it in any of the other ones. So that's the stuff off the top of my head that sticks out to me as evidence that this is Deutero-Pauline.
Yeah, right. What do you make of? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, in 3:14, I hope to come to you soon, but I'm writing these things to you so that if I delay, you may know how one ought to behave in the household of God, etc., etc. Yeah, I guess that could be, but you're going to go to all this trouble when you might be a week or two late. So it just seems like a kind of cute way of saying that this is what is left other than personal instruction. This is the personal instruction. Wink, wink.
What do you think about the passages in First Timothy and in First Corinthians about not letting women speak in church?
In there's the lively possibility that the thing in 1 Corinthians 14 is an interpolation. You can't be sure, but it has to mean something, that little snippet is found in two different but close but nearby places in manuscripts. That certainly looks like somebody wanted to annotate this and say, well, something needs to be said about these big mouth women, and he didn't say it, but I will. Let's put it in the margin here. And then somebody else years later is copying this copy, and he says, oh, what is this in the margin? Oh, I guess the previous guy that made this copy left it out. And it was way too late to start over again, so he just put it to the side. And another guy reading the same manuscript and making a new one also saw it, but he didn't know where to put it either, and finally decided on a spot a little further down. I mean, it looks so much like that, and we don't have any manuscripts from this earlier tunnel period in which these writings were supposed to have existed, but we just don't have manuscript evidence. And I admit you can't be sure, but that's true of almost any assertion we make. Now, Catherine Krieger, who last I knew taught at Gordon Conwell, she had this fascinating theory that in Timothy, it doesn't actually mean women are not to teach, though I given other statements about women's ministry and how it ought to stop in the pastorals. I think it probably does mean that, but I've got to admit this is fascinating. She says that the writer says, I do not allow women to teach or to take authority over men, for Adam was created before Eve, and it was Eve who was deceived, not Adam. Well, she said, that remarkably is reminiscent of one of the Nag Hammadi texts with the several retellings of Genesis and Garden of Eden they have, in which let's see, where the heavenly Eve, one of the Ions, she creates, or at least enlivens, Adam. The archons created him out of clay, but he was just a mannequin. They didn't know how to energize him. But the heavenly Eve did give him a jolt of some kind of force, and he awakened and stood up on his feet and so on. And so Krieger says, and the archons told him that he was created first, and that the fleshly Eve was created from him. But Krieger says the word for I do not allow women to teach or take authority, that is over men, that is the word authentane, which could indeed mean authoring something or usurping authority. So which does it mean? Well, if it meant authoring something, is the point to condemn the version of the Eden story in Gnosticism, where they are teaching that women created men and that Eve was deceived in that she was told she was made out of Adam's rib. And I thought that is pretty darn interesting. I'm left not knowing what I think is the intent of the passage, but that is pretty fascinating. And if it's true, and this is her point, I mean, I think she's like a Christian feminist, but that doesn't matter. It's an interesting insight. This would mean that, wait a second, the text is not condemning all women. It's not saying I don't allow women to teach. I don't allow women to teach that they created man. And because Paul does argue that way, or somebody in 1 Corinthians, what is it, 10, about women prophesying, praying in public, and so forth. So he says women should wear veils because man was created first to reflect the glory of God directly, but women were created for the man's sake, and therefore they reflect the glory of their husbands, which only their husbands are allowed to see, and that's why they wear veils. He talks in such terms. So it's not totally un-Pauline. It doesn't sound like some weird stuff, but it would show evidence of acquaintance with Gnosticism and an attempt to head it off at the past. Don't let women teach this stuff, because some of them are. Or maybe he just means don't let the ones that believe this teach. So it's possible it isn't telling women not to teach or speak. So it's there is a good feminist rejoinder to the usual reading that both epistles are trying to shut women up. You really could read it either way in both cases. So it's tough to say, but there's plenty of other stuff in the pastorals that do definitely seem to be later. And in Luke Acts, in my New Testament dissertation, the widow traditions in Luke Acts, I say that I start out saying that it's customary to read scholars saying, oh, yes, Luke was the friend of women in their ministry. Look how many times he mentions women in various connections. Take another look at that, pal. He's always putting it down. If I go into some detail about that, and I say this is just like the pastorals, where let's dissolve the order of women, the order of widows and virgins, because there they go from house to house teaching. They don't know what they're talking about. They're misleading people. That's kind of like what Luke does. He blows the trumpet in Acts about the prophesying daughters of Philip. Well, we sort of expect to hear something from him. And indeed, in a few minutes, a prophet says, I'm warning Paul, if he goes to Jerusalem, he's going to be tied up and bound like a prisoner. Well, shouldn't that be the prophesying daughters of Philip that say that? But now they don't say anything. And Agabus is dragged out of another scene earlier in the story, and they called him in to do the prophecy. Or who is it that gives the prophetic oracle about Jesus in the infancy narrative? Well, they introduce Anna this aged prophetess. Oh, okay, she's going to prophesy, but no, she doesn't. Instead, it's Simeon. What the heck? It's like he's silencing women, and that's just what you've got in the put downs of women's ministry and the pastoral. So this does seem much later to me.
Solar Knight, thank you for your super chat. Explain Phoebe and Junia if women are to be silent. 1 Timothy 2:12.
Isn't that they're in Romans 16, I think, aren't they? Oh, you mean the silence thing? Yeah. Well, this is not a problem because this is at least supposed to be actually Pauline, and it's supposed to be a kind of a PS to the larger book of Romans, though I tend to think it probably is a separate letter on behalf of Phoebe, who serves already as a minister. It's not quite accurate to say deaconess. It's just the regular word deacon, which means minister, servant. So she is now going to minister among whatever congregation. Some say it must have been Ephesus. Some say, oh, no, it was really Rome. But Paul, or whoever wrote that, certainly was not against women's ministry. And he also mentions Junia, Andronicus and Junia, noteworthy among the apostles. What's that again? A female apostle? That's been hidden because, in the Bauer lexicon under Junia, it says now this was a rare name for a woman in that time, and especially among Christians. There's really no decent evidence for that, and you can't tell from the text because it says Juniatus. Now, or I'm probably getting that wrong with the spelling, but the idea is you can't tell if it's male or female, the name. And so they said, well, most scholars said Junia could be Junion, I think is the way it appears. That could be an abbreviated form of Juniatus, which is an attested male name, but an abbreviated version of it is not. I mean, if you had an abbreviation for it, that's what it would be, but there's no evidence that people did that. Whereas Junia, female name, is quite well known. And so if you just go by the evidence of vocabulary, that he must be talking about a female apostle, whatever he means by an apostle. And so you'd never have the writer of the pastoral saying something like this. But this seems to be earlier than the pastorals. So it's a good point, though. In fact, he's pointed out a difference between the two that makes sense according to the usual historical reconstruction.
What do you think about the idea of these texts wanting women to wear veils? Do you think this could be a predecessor to what we see with misogynistic customs in Islam about women having to cover from head to toe, the hijab, and all this other stuff? You think there could be a connection?
Well, it's at least the same idea, because you don't want to show off the beauty of your wife or your daughter to some lustful Lothario who might decide to seduce or rape her. But the idea, I think, is that in context, he actually gives one reason for the veiling in the beginning of the comment and another one at the end. Now, what's going on there? I think it makes better sense if the two are referring to the same thing. And he says, what he seems to be saying, I think, is that Eve was naked in the Garden of Eden, as was Adam. And according to the Gnostic version of this, in a couple of Nag Hammadi texts again, It says that the archons saw her and lusted after her and went to rape her, but it was docetic because she created a false image of herself, a kind of a hologram, while she disguised herself as as a tree, just like Apollo and Daphne, I think it is. He was running after her, and she outwitted him and turned into a tree. And where the heck did she go? So I think at the end of it, he says, and this is why women are to wear a veil, because of the angels. What? Well, if he means the archons may be floating around invisibly above the church service, and which is kind of what the Dead Sea Scrolls people said. And in the book of Revelation, they got their own liturgy going on up there. If they're watching your, it sounds so ridiculous, but they're hovering over your church service, and there are these hot babes prophesying, and you can see how beautiful they are. You may get attacked by an angel. It makes you wonder, had Paul or whoever wrote this actually thought that had happened? Well, if he's talking about Adam and Eve, though, so I guess that would be enough. He's saying, women, don't let this happen to you. And so I think that's what he's going on about there, the imagined danger of a lustful angel wanting to have his way with a devout but unveiled Christian woman in public. I guess he's not spying on her at home. He just goes where the pickings are good in a group of women. Now, I'm guessing that this was already part of Jewish social etiquette, that women would be veiled without reference to God or angels, just out of modesty. Because later in First Peter and others, you've got references to decent women not prettying themselves up with makeup and jewelry and hairdos, which is why the Amish don't. It's funny, people that say they take it literally make an exception. Like, did Tammy Baker ever read any of those passages? I guess not. Maybe she just couldn't read. But I'm sure it's the same idea. And I've always thought it's ironic for feminists to say, hey, you're blaming the victim when you say that a woman dressed in a provocative way got raped. She asked for it. No, that just shows you think women are evil temptresses. No, lady, that's not the point. That advice is assuming that men are lascivious, knuckle walking thugs who they can't control themselves. So you better not do anything that's likely to for them to catch the scent of you. It's men who are being put down, not women in that, or angels in this case, I guess.
So do you think that the author, conceivably, that the authors of First Corinthians could have been coordinating at the same moment with the creation of the pastoral letters, and that could explain why there's material that shows up uniquely in First Timothy and First Corinthians about women being silent in the church? Or could it be, if it is an interpolation, if we go that direction, that the author of First Timothy was the person that inserted it himself?
This is what Winsome Monroe says in her brilliant book, Authority in Paul and Peter, where she pinpoints several of these sort of reactionary sounding passages, cheek by jowl with what otherwise sounds pretty progressive and even radical in terms of ethics and mores. And she shows by discontinuity in the flow of the text, by unusual vocabulary concentrated in these statements, that it doesn't sound much like whoever wrote the rest of First Corinthians or even Ephesians or Colossians, that have these so-called Haustafel, household codes, instructions for behavior of all the family members and servants. Children obey your parents, wives obey your husbands. Um, Monroe says that it looks like all of those bits and pieces, about 6 or 7 of them here and there, are what she calls the pastoral stratum. And she does think it's whoever wrote the pastoral epistles, because the pastorals are intended apparently to serve as a prism through which to read the earlier epistles, which were shunned for a while in the 2nd century because the Gnostics and Marcionites liked them so much. And so one approach was to dump all of them and substitute a shorter Orthodox canon, namely the 3 pastoral epistles. But then at some point they said, well, if you can read the other ones, but you should read them in light of what's established in the pastorals. And then a further step would have been, maybe they're not getting the message. Let's actually add pastoral type stuff in those epistles. And again, this is all speculation because we don't have early enough manuscripts to know whether they went one way or the other. But I think you're right. There is a definite commonality because the same author or the same community did see to the writing of the pastorals and the toning down of the previous Pauline letters.
What do you make of the mention of an antithesis in First Timothy? Some scholars think that it's post-Marcionite because of that. Others say just because that word is there, it's not so clear. And also, this goes in tandem with the presence of the word gnosis. But even that's a common Greek word and doesn't really make it by itself clear.
It's so tempting, though. I tend to agree with Dennis MacDonald that when it says, now don't fall for the antitheses of what is falsely called gnosis. Boy, who is he warning against? It sure sounds to me like, yeah, he's talking about the Marcionite document, the antitheses, and the gnosis that they and the Valentinians and others were promoting. So again, you can't prove it, but that just seems too good not to be true.
And in my final question, what do you make of and again, before I get to this final question, just want to remind everybody again, as I've been doing in the live chat, if you want your questions answered, please super chat your questions. You know how to do it. Okay. So what do you make of Jerome Murphy O'Connor's argument that 2 Timothy is authentic? And he argued this because it resembles the content of Romans so well, and it just seems so different from 1 Timothy. You did mention another scholar earlier that held similar views to Jerome Murphy O'Connor.
Friedrich Schleiermacher. He said Paul wrote well, actually it's a little different. Paul wrote 2 Timothy and Titus, but somebody else wrote 1 Timothy combining those two, and of course leaving out stuff and adding some stuff too. But I think to me Murphy O'Connor is way too conservative. In fact, he and Frederick Vissa, I think, both have written to the effect that we can't accept interpolation hypotheses in the absence of actual manuscript proof, because then we're up the creek. We can never know whether we're reading Paul or not. Well, I'm afraid that that's one of those cases where what should be agnosticism turns into fideism. We'll never know, I would say. But these people are saying, well, innocent until proven guilty. What do you mean? That it's not. I've read that from other people too. That's not appropriate to deciding on the authenticity of a text. You just don't know. You have to admit that. even if it makes your exercises in theology tough to do. But he's one of those, and a great scholar, no kidding there. I mean, no question about that. But I think it's a little apologist in the negative way. There, he's just trying to protect the canon and the theological use of it. If the bugle doesn't give a distinct sound, who's going to know to prepare for battle? He wants the bugle of the Bible to be absolutely clear, but it isn't.
The funny thing is, I actually take a similar view that I don't accept, as you know, interpolations about manuscript evidence. But I think the direction he's taking is different from me, because it's almost like saying it's not a forgery without evidence. Now, yeah, he himself accepts that First Timothy is a forgery, which is ironic. The big issue with interpolation hypotheses in general is scholars have changed their minds over time about what's an interpolation, what isn't. This doesn't matter if they're an apologist or not. And the other problem is we have to be careful, because this is why I don't like interpolation arguments about strong evidence, is because then anybody can willy-nilly decide what goes in and goes out of a text for any reason.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I think you just can't use the Bible as a definitive authority for anything, because or like, what are these rare words that are translated as homosexuality in 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy? There's so few attested uses of these words, we can't tell from the context what they refer to. So imagine if you took that seriously and you're in a conservative church preaching on morality and you say, my brethren, there's a 58% chance that God is condemning homosexuality right here. What? You just don't know. Don't pretend you do.
Yeah, that is stupid. Stockfall Verta, thank you for your super chat. Stockfall Verta, thank you for another super chat. How does Timothy end up in Polycarp's only letter?
Well, if he wrote the pastorals, he may not be quoting them exactly, unless he did write them as pseudepigraphs and then is quoting them as if they were Paul's. But the mention, the use of Pauline material in the Epistle of Polycarp, or possibly the two epistles of Polycarp, I believe P.N. Harrison argued that actually we have two letters joined together in Polycarp. Who knows? But that actually, to me, strengthens the idea that actually it might be the reverse, that if Polycarp wrote the pastorals, then in the pastorals he's having Paul quote him rather than the other way around.
We have another super chat. I finished in tie. Thank you for your super chat. Hello, Dr. Price. Hope you are well. Great hair, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, I haven't lost that yet.
Everything you do look great in that hair. You know.
I'll tell Carol she's my barber. Yeah, I think it looks pretty decent. Though she's threatening me with another haircut any day. So. Oh boy.
Well, I'll see everybody tomorrow, and remember, the link to purchase The Amazing Colossal Apostle is in the description below, and the pinned comment, including the links to Bob's other books as well, and his Substack. That being said, Bob, thank you for joining me tonight.
Oh, anytime.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.